Alright everyone, it's time for a little bit of more social opinion here than anything current events related on the topic of warmongering and being antagonistic and intervention and proxy wars. I've made my views clear a number of times on the subject. I'm anti-war generally speaking. Unless we've been explicitly attacked by a state or non-state actor, or a close ally has and they've asked us to help them or something like that, I'm uncomfortable with the concept of like drone-based warfare. I'm glad Trump has stopped arming and funding the terrorists in Syria that we have been for so many years. I think that'll improve the situation greatly. By the way, you'll notice the corporate media talked about that for a few hours and did the whole Russia bullcrap thing that it usually does. Oh, he's bowing down to Putin. Russia won in Syria, as though there was any other opportunity anyway. We couldn't solve anything there. And when they realized, I think, that even a lot of liberals were like, well, it is ending a conflict there, that's a good thing. They stopped talking about it because they realized that they couldn't really, they couldn't hammer him anymore on the subject because people largely disagreed with the Russian conspiracy angle that they were covering it from. I think that's exactly why it sort of gets knocked out of the news so quickly, because people's reaction was like, yeah, what's the problem with this? Now, who cares if Russia wins in Syria? Why are we involved? It's a dumb idea. Well, it always was a dumb idea. It's like saying, oh, yeah, we scaled things down in Afghanistan. Russia built a factory there. Oh, no, we lost in Afghanistan. No, we won by getting uninvolved in the situation. But U.S. foreign policy has been openly hostile towards a number of states now for quite a few years. We're talking, for most people watching this video, you've never actually lived in a time period where we haven't been involved in a proxy war of some sort or another. You have to go pre-Korea to find that period, that happy period of time back when we were still a sovereign nation that wasn't playing world police. I don't think it's helpful. I think it's a long-term strategy of failure. Part of it's the grand chessboard. Part of it was engineered to contain the USSR and now, to an extent, China, to contain them diplomatically and in a military sense, to put pressure on them to try to grind them down. Part of it is to weaken the possibility of another state using nuclear weapons against the West. And that's all well and good. The problem is it comes at such a high cost, both in terms of lives, in terms of money, certainly in terms of the expenditure of manpower, that it's not really worth the ultimate payoff. I think the idea, the more benevolent are like, well, we've got to stave off doomsday, so we've got to try to eliminate these other nuclear states. Somehow, we can't attack them directly. We need to surround them with hostile states through proxy war. See, that would be all well and good as part of a greater strategy if it worked. But then we ask ourselves, how many times has this actually succeeded? And we come up with the answer, basically no times has it actually worked. What keeps happening is like with Afghanistan in the late 70s, early 80s, with the Soviet Union there, with Carter and Reagan arming up militias to beat on the Soviets that are trying to march in and establish their de facto control over Afghanistan to push to the Indian Ocean. What ends up actually happening? The USSR collapses. Like, it does hurt them quite badly. It was their version of Vietnam. Tens of thousands of Soviets died. They lost a freakish number of tanks and other vehicles to sabotage in that period. They got ground down. They realized we don't have the capability of dealing with this situation. And they lose. The Soviet Union handily loses against a relatively ragtag group of tribal militias that later on become like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and all these other groups. They lose handily against them. It was actually a stunning victory for the West. The problem is nobody accounted for the fallout. What ended up happening is that because all of those militias have been given so many weapons and gotten years thereafter of essentially on-the-ground combat training, they were much more well-equipped afterwards to rule the nation than the secular government had been. So the secular government that had established, largely a stable state. And it was at the time. There wasn't an epidemic of people growing heroin, poppies, opium poppies for heroin production and morphine and stuff. You didn't have like Taliban telling people to wear full body burqa or anything like that. It's essentially secular. And around Kabul, you would have thought that you were in disco land or something like that. There's a picture of Osama when he's a little kid. He's like wearing a disco suit or something, hanging out with all his friends. None of the women have head coverings. They're showing off their nice long 70s looking hair. They look like they just stepped out of the San Francisco club scene or something like that. But all of these militiamen now, they've got more weapons than the government has. They've got a hell of a lot of money. They've got combat training. A lot of the locals liked them at the time because they're like, oh, well, they protected us from these fucking communists, these godless atheists that wanted to destroy us. And so they get even more manpower. They basically destroy what remained of the secular government and establish their own law and order in most of these regions of Afghanistan. The problem was not the original proposal to arm groups that were at the time indeed fighting for their liberation against the Soviets. The problem is that they then, the corrupted individuals among them took over and then very quickly strong-armed their way into positions of significant power and used that to make more money, to sell and buy weapons as well, and then to attack us. And unfortunately, what we've done in Syria lately looks basically the same. We've been, once again, we armed and funded a group with no specific Western loyalty. And if they were victorious, thankfully now they almost certainly won't be. If they had succeeded, if they had like forced Assad out and then purged ISIS and established their Sharia law quasi-nationalist Syria, they would have eventually attacked us. It would have eventually happened. There would be another major terrorist attack here. It would have been funded by the same people as every other attack that goes on in the West. We all know where that comes from. It doesn't come from Syria. It doesn't come from Afghanistan. It comes from the Arabian Peninsula where all the oil sales are happening. And that's really what would have happened. It's funny when Saudi Arabia, what is it? Is it, it's Qatar or Bahrain, or which state is it that's under constant embargo now by all the other Gulf states? I think it's Qatar, because they're like, oh, you need to crack down on Al Jazeera and all this other weird stuff. They had to fly a bunch of cows in so they could get milk, and just weird stuff like that is going on constantly in this region. All these proxy wars, additionally, that we wage, we couldn't be waging them in a worse part of the world. Like, Vietnam looks sane compared to what we've been doing in Iraq for so long. Because in Vietnam, did terrorists rise up in Vietnam, or did the communist government there calm down and now works with the West openly? The latter. Like, they have no problem with it. The government didn't destabilize. Yeah, for a while it felt really hostile towards us. Really didn't like us. The diplomatic relationship was so bad we declared Pol Pot the legitimate leader of Cambodia and let him go beat on the Vietnamese with tacit world support. That's how bad it was at the time. And the Russians didn't want to get involved. The Chinese are like, yeah, we kind of backed the Vietnamese, but we're kind of scared of this Pol Pot dude. And then they attacked Vietnam later on, and they had their own commie infighting over and over. You wouldn't believe how many wars you've probably never heard of. I didn't know this years ago either. Between the communist nations of the Eastern world during that period of time, we're talking like the 60s through the 90s, these people were slaughtering one another constantly. It actually was a real problem, I guess, at the time. The Russians and Chinese fell out of relations. Now they both abandoned communism. Vietnam's supposedly communistic, but they're kind of capitalist too, let's face it. And they're growing as a result, and now, and nobody has a problem with the Vietnamese or the Vietnamese government. Human rights abuses, yeah, it happens all over the world. Happens in Europe all the time. Western Europe is like the human rights abuse capital of the world at this point. They're constantly abusing their own population and everyone else that they can. And yet to the point at which Merkel's Germany is probably a bigger abuser of the world than any communist, than like the Venezuelans or something like that, which is sad. They've turned back into East Germany, I guess. They've gone back to being led by a communist. As far as though proxy wars and intervention go, it's just a terrible idea. It doesn't work. If it worked, you could make maybe the pragmatic argument, well, yeah, we know people are dying, maybe it's kind of immoral, but we have no choice. We liberated a country, yeah, we killed 10,000 civilians, but now they're free and they're a democracy. You could at least make the pragmatic argument. Most people, as a libertarian, I wouldn't take that argument. I'd say, well, that's irrelevant because you've just dicked around in another country without just cause. Most people, though, would have no problem with that if there was a good result, but there's never a good result. I'm struggling to name a single situation in which there has been. We get involved, I mean, Korea was the last time that the result was kind of good because, you know, half the country became South Korea and is westernized and is, you know, developed and free, as opposed to North Korea, which is miserable and ass backwards. Okay, maybe that, but like in Vietnam, we didn't accomplish anything. We had to finally leave. People who say, oh, well, if we just stuck it out, it would have been better. I'm not so sure it would have been because it was a political war. And all these other struggles have been political wars too. We get involved in Iraq. We say, well, we just got to get rid of Saddam. Don't worry, it won't take long. Mission accomplished. Saddam gets ousted, and we spend years running around looking for WMDs that don't exist. And so their new line is, oh, yeah, because he gave him to Assad. Bullcrap. I don't believe that at all. If he had him at all, he hid him out in some sand dune somewhere, and you're never going to find it. 1,000 years from now, archaeologists will dig it up as a relic of the past age, back when people still lived on Earth more than the moon or something like that. But we get involved there, and they say it's going to be quick and easy, and it was a total lie, and we end up trying to nation build. And we get bogged down doing that. We're doing the same in Afghanistan. We're still kind of doing that in Afghanistan. Trump, thankfully, has shown restraint in that theater, too. Because he said, oh, well, ultimately, I'm giving Mattis control over the situation. The one thing I won't accept is like a troop surge. That's exactly what he should do. Let Mattis run free in Afghanistan, but don't put like 50,000 men back on the ground there to get shot at all over again. Because it'll just tarnish your reputation and make the world a worse place to live in. What we should have done is never have gotten involved in the first, but we should have been more choosy about who we were arming. The other problem is U.S. intel and the U.S. military have this nasty habit of arming the worst possible people that it could. Like the FSA in Syria, we should never have been arming them. Arming some Kurdish offshoot group may piss off the Turks, but it was an okay idea. Arming the Yazidi, like the Christians and the pagans there, would have been a good idea. Arming Assad's forces would have been a better idea than going for the FSA. They were always going to lose anyway. It just made the situation worse, and now we've got egg on our face, and there's really no way to salvage the situation. We've done the damage. The best thing we can do is just not be involved anymore. In Iraq, what are we doing in Iraq? Shock and awe comes along, we destroy all the infrastructure, and then when people are miserable, we make a big show about rebuilding it and saying how noble we are. Doesn't make sense. Arming people in Afghanistan, the groups included Osama's people. Wonderful. That was a great idea from Carter and Reagan. Well, no, it wasn't, because then you have attacks thereafter involving these same groups, and they're using money that was given to them by the CIA on behalf of the United States. Proxy wars don't really work. Other states have tried this too. It doesn't necessarily work any better for them than it does for us. The grand chessboard means that the nuclear powers can't attack one another directly. They can just screw with one another's hegemony in smaller states. And while that's all very amusing, you got to keep in mind that those are real people dying. And it makes at the very least, even if you don't care about the people like the civilians that suffer and die, because I know a lot of people, they're like gung-ho, wave the flag, I don't care how many Iraqis die, I don't care how many Koreans die or something. Okay, if you want to like think of the world that way, I think that's fucked, but you can. At the very least, though, it hasn't actually solved any of our problems. It hasn't led to any of these people actually being liberated. It doesn't bring stability, and it tends to piss off our allies, too, that maybe have better foreign policies laid out. Until recently, our foreign policy has been frenetic. The foreign policy under Trump has somewhat improved, as we see in Syria, as we see with him putting Mattis in charge in Afghanistan, saying, I'm not going to give you a bunch of troops, otherwise do what you need to do. Good. Within Syria, withdrawing support for the FSA. Good. That's all very... Showing restraint on Venezuela. Showing restraint on Cuba, other than the diplomatic side. A lot of Republicans in the past would have said, oh, we're going to bomb those Cubans back to the Stone Age. They're communists or something like that. So far, that hasn't been suggested. That's a good thing. That's about all. Peace out.